Is this what you call work? Playing dinosaurs with a child in the middle of my corporate lobby? Vivian Cross's voice sliced across the marble hall, sharp enough to make two assistants freeze mid-stride. She stood in her steel gray suit, heels clicking like a gavel striking order, her eyes locked on Marcus Hale as though he'd trespassed on sacred ground. Marcus looked up from the floor, where a small herd of plastic dinosaurs huddled around Ella's wheelchair. His hand lingered on the triceratops he'd just set near the girl's lap. "Funny," he said quietly, his tone steady. "The last time I checked, this lobby belonged to everyone who walked through its doors, including your daughter." For a moment, silence held. The girl giggled softly, clutching her dinosaur, unaware of the storm breaking above her head. A receptionist in the distance adjusted her headset, pretending not to listen. It was Marcus's calm defiance, not his job title, that carried weight in the room. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Vivian's lips curled. "You're a janitor. Don't overstep. Your job is to mop floors, not babysit." The words dropped like a verdict. She expected him to stammer, to bow his head like the others. Instead, Marcus rose slowly from the ground, his gaze level. "I know more about children than you think," he said, voice clipped, deliberate. "Maybe more than all the executives in your corner office combined." The color shifted in her face, just slightly. Enough for her aides to glance at each other, wondering what they'd just heard. Vivian recovered quickly, scoffing as though the claim were beneath her notice. Still, her eyes flickered with something she didn't intend to show. Uncertainty. Marcus's expression remained calm, but inside he felt the heat crawl through his chest. He wasn't here to win her approval. He was here because Ella's laughter mattered, because the world already treated her like glass, and because he knew what it felt like to be overlooked until it was too late. Sophie's voice echoed in his memory, his daughter, reminding him that dignity was worth more than any paycheck. Every mop stroke, every late night, every humiliating glance he endured was for her. And maybe, he thought, as Ella tapped the plastic stegosaurus against his hand, maybe for children like this too. He shifted his weight, shoulders broad against the gleaming glass walls. The quiet power wasn't in his uniform, but in the steadiness of his voice. "Your daughter needed someone to play with," Marcus said. "I was here, that's all." Vivian's jaw tightened, the polished control of a woman used to winning every exchange. The assistants at her side waited for her next strike, certain she'd crush this interruption with a single phrase. But Marcus didn't flinch. He stood as though rooted, carrying an unspoken gravity. That unsettled even her. The dinosaurs scattered across the floor became markers of innocence, fragile tokens that money couldn't purchase, but could be dismissed with a single careless heel. The moment stretched long enough that Ella glanced between them, sensing a tension she couldn't name. She reached up, tugging gently on Marcus's sleeve, grounding him in a way her mother never could. He leaned just enough to reassure her, but kept his eyes fixed on Vivian. "Where are you watching from?" Marcus asked softly, not to Vivian, but to the invisible audience this confrontation demanded. Somewhere, he knew, the cameras watched. Somewhere, her world of hidden surveillance and pristine order cataloged every second. And somewhere, unseen witnesses, whether in boardrooms or break rooms, were deciding who looked small and who looked unshakable. Vivian turned, a sharp flick of her wrist, dismissing him as though the matter were closed. But Marcus knew better. He felt it in the stillness of the lobby, in the ripple of eyes pretending not to watch. She had chosen the wrong man to humiliate, and this was only the beginning. The click of Vivian's heels faded as she strode toward the bank of elevators, but the chill she left behind lingered in the marble lobby. Marcus stood rooted, Ella's hand still resting on his sleeve. Around them, the dinosaurs lay scattered like tiny sentinels, silent witnesses to a clash neither of them fully understood. He crouched again, smoothing the edge of Ella's blanket where it had slipped off her knee. "Don't worry," he murmured softly, just for her. "Dinosaurs don't scare easy." She grinned, and for a heartbeat the tension dissolved into the warmth of her innocent world. But across the lobby, whispers began. The receptionist lowered her headset and leaned toward a security guard. Two suited assistants hovered by the glass doors, their heads close together, their voices too low to catch. Marcus felt it like static in the air. the undercurrent of judgment, the way power drew eyes and silence alike. He rose, gathering the dinosaurs into a small cluster by Ella's chair. His body language was quiet but deliberate, refusing to shrink. Inside, though, his chest tightened. He knew this wasn't over. Vivian Cross was not a woman who forgot slights, especially not public ones. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, swallowing her figure in polished steel. For a moment, Marcus caught his reflection in the glass. Blue janitor's uniform, tired eyes, calloused hands. Humble markers of survival. But beneath them all, buried like a scar that never healed, was the knowledge of who he used to be. Dr. Marcus Hale, pediatric trauma specialist. It had been years since anyone had called him that. Years since a single accusation, twisted and politicized, had stripped away not only his license, but his entire sense of self. He'd walked away with his daughter's hand in his, choosing obscurity over a fight. He couldn't win, and yet, standing here now, he felt the old instinct stirring, sharp, precise, unshakable. Marcus? Ella's small voice pulled him back. She held up the Triceratops, its horn cracked from an old fall. "Can you fix him?" He smiled faintly. "I'll try." From his pocket, he pulled a roll of electrical tape he always carried for loose wires and broom handles. Carefully, he wound a strip around the broken horn, steady hands performing a repair that was more symbolic than practical. Behavioral foreshadowing. He knew the motions well, fixing what others dismissed as broken, giving fragile things a chance to hold together just a little longer. "You're good at that," Ella said, her tone matter of fact, as if she saw something no one else could. Before Marcus could reply, the security guard approached. "Sir," the man said with a tight professionalism, "Ms. Cross has requested you keep to your assigned areas from now on. The lobby isn't one of them." Marcus straightened, his eyes narrowing just slightly. The guard wasn't hostile, just doing his job. Still, the message was clear. Stay invisible. Stay in the shadows. He forced a nod, bending to pick up the last dinosaur. "Understood." His voice was calm, but Ella caught the flicker of something underneath it. The guard lingered a second too long, then walked back toward his post. Marcus knelt once more, placing the patched Triceratops in Ella's lap. "Looks like this one's stronger than before," he said gently. Ella studied him, her brow furrowed as though trying to piece together a puzzle bigger than her toys. "You don't talk like the others," she whispered. Marcus's chest tightened again. He reached out, tucking the blanket more securely around her. "That's because I listen." The hum of the elevator returned, a reminder that Vivian was likely already spinning this moment into something she could control. Marcus could almost hear her voice in a boardroom upstairs, dismissing him, framing the scene as disorder beneath her pristine order. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the quiet janitor she belittled still carried the knowledge to save a life when it mattered most. As he turned back to his cart, Marcus felt the weight of eyes on him once more. Not just Ella's curious gaze, but others, workers, clerks, assistants, who had seen enough of the exchange to register something they couldn't quite name. A memory stirred. The courtroom years ago, when suits and polished shoes had judged him without listening, when truth hadn't mattered against power. The bitterness pressed at his ribs, but he pushed it down. Not here, not now. He wheeled his cart slowly toward the corridor, each squeak of the wheels echoing against the marble. Behind him, Ella's laughter returned, the dinosaurs once again marching across her lap. That sound, pure, unguarded, anchored him. But Vivian's words stayed with him too, like barbs under the skin. "You're a janitor, don't overstep." He exhaled, steady and deliberate. He'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't something handed down from the powerful. It was carried quietly, held in the choices no one saw. And though he kept his head low, though he scrubbed their floors and polished their glass, he knew the truth. The day would come when his hands would no longer be ignored. The lobby returned to its rhythm, phones ringing, shoes clattering, conversations flowing. But beneath it all ran a current, a subtle shift. Somewhere between the dinosaurs, the broken Triceratops, and the steady voice of a janitor, a story had begun. And though Vivian Cross didn't realize it yet, she had already chosen the wrong battlefield. The lobby's rhythm carried on, but Marcus knew the shift had already happened. Vivian's words still rang in his head, cruel and cutting, and though the floor gleamed beneath his mop, every stroke felt heavier. The day pressed on like nothing had changed, but in truth, everything had. He kept to the side corridors, wiping glass and emptying bins, yet whispers still followed him. 2 clerks passed by, voices low. "Did you hear what she said to him?" one muttered. "Cold," the other replied, shaking her head. They glanced at Marcus as if expecting him to snap back, but he stayed silent, shoulders squared, jaw tight. Silence was its own armor. He'd worn it for years, but the longer he pushed the cart down those halls, the more he felt Ella's eyes in his memory, the way she'd looked at him, sharp and curious, as if she saw through the disguise. By late afternoon, the corridors began to hum with anticipation. Word spread that Vivian Cross would be holding an unscheduled meeting with her board in the glass-walled conference suite that overlooked the lobby. Marcus had cleaned that room enough times to know its every detail. The mahogany table polished to perfection, the massive art installation on the far wall meant to remind visitors of legacy and power. A room designed to intimidate. From the supply closet across the hall, Marcus wheeled out a bucket, the scent of bleach stinging the air. He told himself to focus, to keep his head down. But as the elevator doors slid open and Vivian emerged with her entourage, his chest tightened again. Ella was with her, wheeled in by a nurse in crisp white. The sight cut through the noise. Ella clutched the patched triceratops, its taped horn a quiet badge of survival. She caught Marcus's eye for just a second, smiling as though he were the only familiar face in the crowd. He gave the smallest nod, enough to steady her. Vivian noticed, her brows arched, lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing, but her gaze lingered longer than it should have before she gestured toward the conference suite. Inside, the boardroom filled quickly, voices sharp with business. Marcus busied himself in the hall, wringing out his mop, though the echoes of that room reached him easily. The air carried snippets, quarterly growth, stakeholder alignment, brand integrity, cold words dressed as strategy. But over it all, Ella's laughter rose suddenly, a burst of sound in a place built for silence. Marcus glanced through the glass, watching her spin the triceratops across the polished table. The director stiffened, visibly uncomfortable. Vivian leaned close, murmuring to the nurse, her expression taut with embarrassment. Marcus felt the twist in his gut. He'd seen this pattern before, a mother more concerned with appearances than the child herself. He pressed harder on the mop, jaw set. And then he heard it, a cough, sharp and wet, cutting through the boardroom air. At first, just a sound, but then Ella's shoulders shook, her small frame quivering. The toy slipped from her hand. Marcus froze, pulse quickening. He knew that sound. He knew that posture. The signs were subtle, but they screamed to him like alarms. Inside, Vivian waved her hand impatiently at the nurse, who fumbled with a water bottle. Ella coughed harder, her lips paling. Panic flickered across the nurse's face, but she forced a tight smile, glancing nervously at her employer. Marcus's hand gripped the mop handle so tight his knuckles whitened. Instinct surged up, the doctor's instinct, buried but never gone. His eyes darted to the glass wall, to the faint rise and fall of Ella's chest. Too shallow, too fast. "Not here," he whispered under his breath. "Not like this." The directors inside began shifting, murmuring, some standing. Vivian snapped, "She's fine. Just give her a moment." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. For the first time, control slipped through her fingers. Marcus stepped forward, his body moving before his mind could stop it. His mop clattered against the marble, echoing like a gavel strike. Heads turned, both inside the boardroom and out in the hall. He pressed a palm flat against the glass door, his eyes locked on Ella, who now slumped against her chair, her breaths shallow, ragged. The nurse fumbled again, her hands trembling too much to be of use. Marcus's chest hammered. Years of silence battled against the weight of expertise clawing to the surface. The decision was no longer his to make. It had already been made. He pushed the door open. The room fell silent. Every polished director, every assistant, every set of eyes swung toward him. Vivian's expression hardened instantly, outrage flashing across her face. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus didn't flinch. His voice cut through the silence, calm and steady, the voice he hadn't used in years. "She's not fine, and if you don't let me help, she won't be." The words landed like a crack of thunder, freezing the room. Vivian's jaw opened, then closed, her control splintering under the weight of panic she could no longer hide. Ella's breathing grew worse, her small hands clutching at the air as if reaching for something to anchor her. Marcus stepped closer, his presence unshakable now. The janitor uniform hung on his body, but his posture told another story. A story no one in that room yet knew, but were about to discover. The air in the boardroom thickened, heavy as glass about to shatter. Vivian Cross's hand hovered above the table, frozen mid-gesture, as though even she didn't know what to do next. Around her, the board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, their eyes darting between the gasping child and the janitor who had just stepped into forbidden space. Marcus's voice had landed like a hammer on marble, calm, undeniable. Now, silence pressed against him, daring him to back down. But his eyes never left Ella. Her lips had taken on a faint bluish tinge, her chest working far too hard for air. He knew the signs too well. He'd seen them under hospital lights, in emergency rooms, in moments where every second mattered. Vivian snapped out of her hesitation, her voice cutting like ice. "Step away. Security?" "No," Marcus said, sharper this time. "If you waste another 30 seconds arguing, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." A murmur rippled through the boardroom, the directors stiffening as if they'd just witnessed a breach of decorum too shocking to process. But none of them moved. None of them knew what to do. The nurse, pale and trembling, tried again with the water bottle, her hands shaking so badly she dropped the cap onto the gleaming table. Ella's cough deepened, a wet rattle that made Marcus's stomach clench. He moved, swift and purposeful. Kneeling beside the wheelchair, he placed 2 fingers against Ella's neck, counting the thready, rapid pulse. Then he tilted her chin, opening the airway just enough to help. His hands were steady, decisive, the way they had been 100 times before in another life. "Her airway's compromised," he said, his tone clipped. "She needs help now." Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping back across the polished floor. "Who do you think you are?" Marcus met her gaze, unflinching. "The only one in this room who knows what he's doing." The truth struck harder than he expected. The directors exchanged uneasy glances, some leaning forward, others shifting back as if to distance themselves from liability. They weren't watching Vivian anymore. They were watching him. For Vivian, the realization was a crack in her armor. Her authority, built on wealth and fear, suddenly meant nothing in the face of her child's labored breaths. She opened her mouth, but no command came. Marcus returned his focus to Ella, speaking softly to her now, his voice lowering into calm reassurance. "You're okay. Stay with me, kiddo." His fingers adjusted her position, his body moving on instinct honed by years of training he was supposed to have buried. The nurse tried to interrupt. "Sir, I can—" "You can't," Marcus said firmly without looking up. "Get me a first aid kit, now." The final word carried weight, enough to jolt the nurse into action. She hurried out, leaving Marcus in command of a room he wasn't supposed to own. Behind him, Vivian's breathing sharpened, fury mixing with fear. She wasn't used to being sidelined, wasn't used to being powerless. But as she looked down at her daughter, small, pale, and struggling, her voice faltered. "If anything happens to her—" "It already is," Marcus interrupted. His tone was clipped, merciless in its precision. "And unless you stop talking and start listening, you'll lose her." The room stilled again. Marcus leaned close to Ella, his hand steady against her back as he coaxed each breath. His mind raced through protocols, triaging options with the efficiency of a man who had done this too many times to count. He wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to reveal himself, but there was no other choice. Through the glass walls, people began to gather in the lobby below, their faces tilted up toward the commotion. Assistants, clerks, security. Witnesses drawn by the sight of the untouchable Vivian Cross standing helpless while her janitor fought for her daughter's life. Marcus didn't notice them. His focus was absolute, narrowed to the fragile chest rising and falling beneath his hand. He remembered nights in the trauma ward, the rush of adrenaline, the voices calling for orders only he could give. Those ghosts returned now, steadying him in the present. The nurse stumbled back into the room, a white kit clutched in both hands. Marcus seized it, his movements efficient as he tore it open. Alcohol swabs, a portable resuscitation mask, epinephrine, tools he recognized instantly. Tools he hadn't touched in years, but handled like second nature. He fitted the mask gently against Ella's face, his voice calm as he spoke to her. "Breathe with me, okay? In and out, just like this." Vivian's hands shook against the table, her polished nails tapping against the wood in a rhythm that betrayed her panic. For once she had no order to give, no wealth to throw at the problem. She could only watch as the man she had belittled took charge of her world. And the board, every one of them, saw it. "Come on," Marcus urged softly, pressing the resuscitator with careful rhythm. "Stay with me, Ella." The girl's chest began to rise more evenly, the harsh rattling easing just slightly. Marcus kept going, refusing to allow relief to break his focus too soon. Every second counted, every breath mattered. Behind him, Vivian whispered, so quiet it barely carried across the room. "Please." The word was almost lost in the shuffle, but Marcus heard it, and for the first time, he recognized something human in her voice, a crack where the armor of wealth and arrogance had always sealed her shut. The silence that followed was different, no longer judgment, no longer disdain. It was the silence of an audience watching a reversal they couldn't look away from, and Marcus knew. This was only the beginning of the truth breaking through. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable, until Ella let out a weak but steady breath beneath the mask. Marcus adjusted his grip on the resuscitator, counting each rise of her chest, timing each compression with practiced precision. He didn't look up, not at Vivian, not at the board members, not at the faces pressed against the glass outside. His world had narrowed to the fragile rhythm of survival. The boardroom, usually a theater for wealth and control, had transformed into something raw. Men in tailored suits and women in polished heels leaned forward as if the outcome of their entire empire now rested on the janitor's calloused hands. None dared to interrupt. Marcus felt the faintest shift beneath his palm, Ella's lungs fighting back, pulling more air than before. Relief flickered, but he kept his focus razor sharp. He knew better than to celebrate too early. Vivian's voice broke the air, trembling but insistent. Will she? "She's stabilizing," Marcus cut in, not unkindly but without room for doubt. "But she's not out of danger. I need space." He didn't wait for permission. With a swift motion, he gestured to the directors nearest him. "Move the chairs back. Clear this side." His tone carried command, not request, and to their own surprise, they obeyed. The polished leather chairs screeched against the floor as the board members shuffled backward, giving him the space of a battlefield. Vivian hovered at the edge of the table, her usual composure unraveling strand by strand. She looked at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time, not as a complication to appearances, not as a fragile extension of her brand, but as a child slipping through her hands. The nurse returned from the corner, voice shaking. "Sir, I called emergency services. They're on their way." Marcus gave a curt nod but didn't look up. "Good, but she doesn't have 10 minutes. She has me." The words landed with a weight that none could ignore. They weren't boastful. They weren't loud. They were simple fact. Ella stirred faintly, a sound like a whimper escaping her throat. Marcus's voice softened, pitched only for her. "You're okay, little one. You've got this." And then it happened. The smallest of things, yet impossible to miss. Ella's hand, pale and trembling, reached for him. She bypassed her mother's diamond-laden fingers, bypassed the nurse's nervous hands, and clutched at Marcus's sleeve. The room seemed to exhale at once. The symbolic gesture cut through the air sharper than any word could. Vivian flinched. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The sight of her daughter choosing the janitor, clinging to him as though he were safety itself, left her rattled in a way no hostile takeover or failed merger ever had. A director whispered, almost to himself, "She trusts him." Marcus didn't answer. He adjusted the mask again, his motions precise, his mind working through contingencies. The years of suppression, of hiding what he was, burned at the edges of his chest. This wasn't just janitorial labor anymore. This was who he was, who he had always been. Through the glass walls, the crowd in the lobby grew larger. Phones appeared, some lifted discreetly, others bold enough to record openly. The story was already spreading. A billionaire's child collapsing, a janitor stepping forward. The optics Vivian had so carefully guarded for years were unraveling in real time. Marcus remained focused, his every action calm and deliberate. He didn't need them to know his past, not yet. The truth would reveal itself in the weight of his actions. The faint color returned to Ella's cheeks, not much, but enough for Marcus to register progress. He steadied the mask, leaning close so she could hear him. "Stay with me, Ella. You're stronger than you think." Behind him, Vivian shifted, her heels clicking softly as she approached. Her voice, stripped of its usual steel, was thin, almost breaking. "What are you doing to her?" Marcus didn't look up. "Saving her." The bluntness stung, but it was undeniable. No board member dared to contradict him. No one questioned whether a janitor should speak this way to a billionaire CEO. In this moment, titles were irrelevant. Life was the only currency, and Marcus was the only one who held it. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. The nurse returned again, fumbling with her phone. "Paramedics, 3 minutes out." Marcus gave another short nod, but inside, his focus tightened. 3 minutes was too long. He needed Ella stable enough to survive the transfer. His mind replayed old training, flipping through every scenario he'd faced in ER trauma bays. His voice dropped low again, meant only for Ella. "Hang on, we're almost there." The girl's small hand still clung to his sleeve, her grip faint but steady. Marcus felt the weight of it, not just the trust of a child, but the silent proof of who he really was beneath the uniform. Around him, the directors watched as though seeing a story rewrite itself. The janitor wasn't just cleaning up after them. He was commanding their world with nothing more than skill, calm, and authority born of necessity. Vivian swallowed hard, her throat working against words she couldn't yet form. For the first time in her career, she was not in control, and Marcus Hale, the man she had dismissed as nothing more than a mop with shoes, had just become the center of her empire's gaze. Marcus's sleeve was damp where Ella's fingers clutched it, but he didn't move. That small hand anchored him more than any command ever could. He pressed the resuscitator, rhythmically, watching her chest rise with each compression, refusing to let hesitation creep in. The boardroom air had shifted completely. Where Vivian once ruled, silence and fear now reigned. The faint sound of sirens filtered through the glass, distant but approaching. People pressed closer to the lobby windows below, their phones still raised, their whispers ricocheting through the marble chamber. Marcus ignored them. All that mattered was the fragile girl breathing through the mask. Vivian stood just behind him, trembling though she tried to hide it. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she clutched her own wrist, nails digging into her skin. She wanted to say something, an order, a demand, but no command would bend this situation to her will. She's mine," she whispered, her voice cracking as though she spoke more to herself than anyone else. "She's all I have." Marcus glanced up just briefly. He didn't soften his expression, but his words cut with measured calm. "Then start acting like she's more than a reflection of you." Vivian recoiled as though struck. The directors shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between mother and janitor. No one dared to intervene. Marcus returned his focus, counting Ella's pulse again. Still rapid, but stronger now. He adjusted the angle of her head slightly, listening for any shift in airflow. His movements were instinctual, practiced, unshakable. The behavioral foreshadowing now blossoming into undeniable proof. The doors to the lobby below burst open, paramedics rushing in with gurneys and equipment. Gasps echoed upward as the crowd parted. Marcus tracked the sound, calculating time. 90 seconds, maybe less. He needed Ella stable until they arrived. He spoke softly to her, his tone low, steady. "You're safe, Ella. Just breathe. That's all you need to do. I've got you." Her lips moved faintly under the mask, no sound forming, but her eyes fluttered open for a second, catching his. Trust shimmered there, fragile but fierce. Marcus felt it like a jolt to the chest. Vivian's composure cracked further. She leaned across the table, her manicured hands trembling. "Tell me what's happening. Tell me." Marcus's voice cut her panic in half. "She's in respiratory distress, likely triggered by aspiration or an obstruction. You wouldn't know it, but I do." The slip almost revealed too much, but he didn't care anymore. The room needed authority, and he was the only one with any to give. The nurse stood by uselessly, wringing her hands. "Sir, should I—" "Clear a path to the door," Marcus ordered. His tone was sharp, absolute. "Paramedics will need direct access. Do it now." The nurse jumped into action, relief flooding her posture at the clarity of command. The directors shifted again, their polished shoes squeaking as they moved chairs, clearing the space. The mahogany table, once a monument of power, now looked absurd, an obstacle to real life. Through the glass, the paramedics appeared at last, rushing toward the boardroom doors. The crowd parted in awe, but their phones still hovered, capturing every angle. The spectacle was undeniable. A billionaire's empire frozen, while a janitor held the only real authority in the room. Vivian's knees bent as though she might collapse, but pride kept her upright. Her lips trembled with words she couldn't shape. For the first time, she wasn't just watching her world unravel. She was powerless to stop it. Marcus looked up as the paramedics entered, his voice brisk but professional. "She's had severe respiratory distress. I stabilized her airway, kept her pulse steady. You'll want to prep for possible aspiration and monitor O2 saturation immediately." The lead medic blinked, startled. This wasn't the jargon of a janitor. He nodded quickly, motioning to his team. "We'll take it from here." Marcus didn't move at first. He waited until the mask was transferred carefully, until Ella was secure on the gurney, until her breaths sounded strong enough to carry her through the doors. Only then did he step back, his chest heaving with restrained adrenaline. Ella's hand slipped from his sleeve as the paramedics wheeled her out. The sudden absence burned more than he expected. The boardroom exhaled collectively, as though the entire empire had been holding its breath. The directors whispered furiously among themselves, their polished composure fractured. Through the glass, the lobby erupted into murmurs. And Vivian. Vivian stared at Marcus, not with arrogance, not with dismissal, with shock, with confusion, with something dangerously close to gratitude buried beneath pride. Her voice was faint, unsteady. Who are you?" Marcus didn't answer. Not yet. He gathered the scattered first aid supplies, returned them neatly to the open kit, and closed the lid with a quiet snap. His silence carried more weight than any declaration. The nurse lingered nearby, her expression conflicted. She had seen enough to know the truth had only begun to surface. The janitor wasn't just a man with steady hands. Something deeper had cracked open in those few minutes, something no uniform could disguise. The paramedics' voices echoed from the hall, urgent but controlled, fading as Ella was rushed toward the elevators. The crowd followed, murmuring, speculating, spreading the story wider with every step. Vivian remained standing, her fists clenched at her sides, her empire suddenly paper-thin. She had built her world on power symbols, polished surfaces, fear, and obedience. Yet here, in front of her directors and her daughter, she had been undone by the man she had tried to dismiss as invisible. Marcus finally lifted his eyes, steady and calm. His voice was quiet, but carried like a blade. "You'll get your answer soon enough." And with that, he turned toward the door, pushing his cart once more. The boardroom door swung closed behind Marcus, leaving a wake of stunned silence. He pushed his cart slowly into the hall, the familiar squeak of the wheels grounding him after the storm inside. His pulse still hammered from the adrenaline, but his face showed none of it. Calm, always calm. He had learned long ago that panic solved nothing. Down the corridor, the echo of hurried footsteps carried. Paramedics moving Ella toward the elevators, Vivian close behind. Her voice, usually sharp with command, cracked as she called out to them, "Careful with her, please!" The word please felt strange in her mouth, like a language she had never spoken. Marcus paused, leaning against his cart. He closed his eyes just for a second, hearing again the ragged sound of Ella's breathing, the desperate weight of her hand on his sleeve. He hadn't expected that connection to cut so deep. It reminded him too much of Sophie when she was small, when the world had first collapsed around them, and he'd sworn never to fail her again. A shadow fell across him. One of the junior directors, nervous, young, still clutching a tablet, hovered nearby. His voice shook, but curiosity drove it forward. That wasn't janitor work. Who are you, really? Marcus studied him for a long moment, then returned his gaze to the floor. Nobody worth talking about. His tone was clipped, final, leaving no room for more. The young man hesitated, then retreated, but not before Marcus caught the look in his eyes, suspicion mixed with awe. As he turned back toward the lobby, Marcus noticed how the crowd had swollen. Assistants, clerks, even security, all whispering, all watching. Some looked at him differently now, no longer as invisible labor, but as the man who had stepped into a fight no one else could win. Phones had captured it too. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the story already slipping out into the world. The elevator doors closed with a metallic thud, carrying Ella and the paramedics down to the waiting ambulance. Vivian had gone with them, leaving the Empire upstairs rudderless for the first time in memory. The directors remained behind, murmuring in clusters, their authority rattled. Marcus's chest tightened as he wheeled his cart into the lobby. He hadn't wanted this. Eyes on him, questions rising. He wanted only to keep his head down, to make it through another shift, to ensure Sophie had what she needed for school, for life. But the truth had a way of clawing back to the surface, no matter how deeply buried. At the far side of the lobby, the receptionist lifted her gaze. For the first time, she didn't look through him. She looked at him. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked, her voice softer than he expected. Marcus hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "She's strong, stronger than most." The receptionist nodded quickly, blinking hard before turning back to her desk. But Marcus had caught the glisten in her eyes. Word would spread from her to, whispers layered on whispers until silence could no longer contain them. Outside, the rising wail of the ambulance sirens faded into distance. The lobby emptied little by little, workers dispersing reluctantly back to their posts. But the tension remained, a current under every movement. Everyone knew something had shifted. Marcus parked his cart near the service corridor, leaning against it with both hands. The weight of memory pressed against him now, the sterile smell of hospital wards, the blur of sleepless nights, the moment everything had been stripped away. He could almost hear the gavel striking, the voice that had condemned him without justice, negligence, a single word that had erased a career, a reputation, a life. He had walked out of that courtroom with nothing but Sophie's hand in his. He had sworn never to return to medicine, never to let anyone pull him back into that world. And yet, here he was, in a corporate tower, saving a child while the world watched. The service corridor door creaked open. Sophie's voice broke the silence. "Dad?" Marcus turned. His daughter stood there in her school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder, her brow furrowed with worry. "I heard," she said quickly. "Everyone's talking about it already. They said you—" Her voice caught. "You helped the CEO's kid?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "She was in trouble. I did what I had to." Sophie dropped her bag by the wall, stepping closer. "You said you'd never—" She trailed off, her eyes searching his face. "But you did." The truth lay unspoken between them. Marcus reached out, resting a calloused hand on her shoulder. Sometimes promises break when something bigger matters. Sophie studied him for a long moment, then nodded faintly. She understood more than he wished she did. From down the hall, footsteps approached again, firmer this time, deliberate. Marcus knew before he looked up who it would be. Vivian Cross returned from the ambulance, her heels striking the floor like a clock counting down. Her posture was still regal, but her eyes were different now. She wasn't the unshakable titan who had dismissed him hours ago. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze flicking briefly to Sophie before returning to Marcus. For a moment, no words came. Then, with visible effort, she forced them out. "You saved my daughter." Marcus said nothing. His silence pressed her further. Vivian's jaw tightened. I don't understand how, but I will. Her voice was sharp again, but beneath it trembled something unsteady. A vow, a warning, maybe both. Marcus straightened, his hand still steady on Sophie's shoulder. Understanding isn't the same as gratitude. The words hung in the air, a quiet challenge. For the first time, Vivian had no immediate response. She turned slightly, her gaze shadowed, as if calculating her next move. But Marcus knew this wasn't over. The truth had only begun to surface. And, soon, hiding would no longer be possible. Vivian's silence was louder than any command she'd ever given. She stood rigid in the lobby, her eyes locked on Marcus as though he were an equation she couldn't solve. Around them, the flow of workers slowed again, sensing the tension, stealing glances as they passed. Marcus felt Sophie stiffen beside him, her small frame pressed closer to his side. Vivian finally spoke, her voice low, sharpened not by certainty, but by confusion. You're not who you say you are. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He had rehearsed this silence for years, the art of letting others believe what they wanted. Still, the weight of her words pressed heavy. She wasn't asking, she was declaring. Sophie bristled. He's exactly who he says, she shot back, her young voice cracking through the quiet. He's my dad. Vivian's eyes flicked to Sophie, narrowing for just a moment, as though reassessing the equation again. Then she straightened, folding her arms with deliberate precision. You'll come with me. Now. Marcus didn't move. I'm still on shift. Her lips twitched, a shadow of her usual smirk. Your shift just changed. The command carried weight, not because of authority over him, but because Marcus knew resistance would only escalate the spectacle. And though he didn't care about his own image, Sophie was still at his side. He wouldn't drag her deeper into this than she needed to be. He leaned down, his voice low for her alone. Go home, Soph. I'll catch up. Her eyes widened. No, Dad. Please, he interrupted gently. The rare word stilled her protest. She swallowed hard, nodded, and lifted her backpack. With one last glance at Vivian, sharp as a dagger, Sophie walked toward the exit. Vivian turned without another word, expecting him to follow, and he did, his cart squeaking behind him like a loyal shadow. They entered the executive elevator, marble walls, brass trim, the air perfumed faintly with lavender. Vivian stood perfectly still, her reflection crisp in the mirrored panels. Marcus stood opposite, the mop handle in his grip, silent. The descent into quiet was broken only by the soft hum of the machine. At last, she spoke. You spoke like a doctor. Marcus's throat tightened, but he kept his voice even. I spoke like someone who didn't want to see a child die. Her head turned slightly, just enough to study his profile. Doctors don't mop floors. He met her gaze, unblinking. Number, they don't. The elevator chimed, the door sliding open into an executive corridor bathed in golden light. Expensive art lined the walls, a showcase of legacy and wealth. Vivian walked ahead, her heels striking like metronome beats of control. Marcus followed, the squeak of his cart a deliberate counterpoint. At the end of the hall, she opened a door into her private office. The space was cavernous, floor to ceiling, and windows overlooking the city skyline, mahogany shelves lined with curated books, an abstract painting worth more than his entire yearly salary. A place built not for comfort, but for intimidation. She gestured to a leather chair across from her desk. Sit. Marcus set the mop against the wall, but remained standing. I'll stand. Her jaw flexed, but she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned against the edge of her desk, arms crossed, studying him like a chess piece. The board won't stop talking about you, neither will the staff. Whatever you did in that room, she broke off, her voice trembling faintly. You saved her. Marcus didn't answer. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the city outside. Vivian's eyes narrowed again. Who are you, really? Don't tell me you're just a janitor. I don't believe it. He exhaled slowly. His victory strategy had always been silence, letting his skills speak when needed and nothing more. But her persistence clawed at him, dragging at old wounds he'd spent years sealing shut. At last, he said, once, I was someone else. That's all you need to know. Vivian tilted her head. And now? Now I keep floors clean. And sometimes I fix broken toys. The deflection was deliberate, but her eyes sharpened at the edge of truth she caught in his tone. She stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the sterile office air. I'm not letting this go. You're in my building, around my child. I'll find out. Marcus didn't flinch. Maybe you will, but right now, the only thing that matters is she's still breathing. The words silenced her more effectively than defiance. For a flicker of a moment, her gaze softened, fear still clinging to her, despite the walls she rebuilt around herself. But then she straightened, smoothing her blazer, restoring the mask of control. You've disrupted my world. Don't think there won't be consequences. Marcus picked up his mop, gripping it like a shield. Consequences are easier to face than regrets. For the first time, Vivian faltered. Just slightly, but enough for Marcus to see it. The battle lines had shifted. Not won, not lost, but drawn deeper than ever before. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Vivian turned her back to him, moving toward the window where the skyline glittered under fading daylight. Her reflection stared at Marcus in the glass, imposing, angular, yet visibly unsettled. She clasped her hands behind her back, a gesture that might have looked authoritative in another context, but here it betrayed a tremor she couldn't control. You know what happens when stories like this spread, she said, her voice measured. A janitor upstages me in front of my board, in front of my daughter, in front of half the company. That's a problem I cannot afford. Marcus leaned on the mop handle, the faint smell of bleach clinging to his uniform. Your daughter breathing, that was the only problem worth solving. Vivian's shoulders tensed. Don't lecture me. I don't need to, Marcus replied, his voice calm, low. You already know the truth. The words landed harder than he intended. She spun around, her eyes sharp, but her composure cracked just enough for him to see the fear buried underneath. For once, she wasn't the CEO commanding silence. She was a mother, terrified of what she'd almost lost. A knock at the door broke the tension. One of the directors stepped in, his polished shoes squeaking against the hardwood. Ms. Cross, the board is requesting clarification. They want to know who he is. His eyes flicked briefly toward Marcus before darting away, unsettled. Vivian's voice cooled. Tell them nothing. Not yet. The director hesitated, then bowed slightly and left, closing the door softly. Marcus straightened, his gaze steady. You can't control this forever. The truth has a way of walking out of locked rooms. Vivian paced slowly along the edge of her desk, her fingers brushing the glossy surface as if anchoring herself. Then tell me what truth I'm dealing with. Who trained you to do what you just did? Marcus said nothing. Silence was the armor he had worn for years, the shield that had protected Sophie and kept his past buried. But her persistence was relentless, and the cracks were forming. Vivian stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. Doctors don't become janitors unless they're hiding from something. His grip tightened on the mop handle. Maybe I'm not hiding. Maybe I just wanted to live a quiet life. She studied him, suspicion sharp in her gaze. No one with hands that steady, with eyes that calm, chooses this. The memory of a courtroom slammed into Marcus, the flash of cameras, the cold judgment of people who had never once touched a patient's hand. Negligence. The word still burned, hollow and false, yet devastating enough to erase everything. His voice hardened. Choice isn't always yours to make. For a moment, the room fell silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Vivian's expression shifted, curiosity overtaking arrogance. She was no longer dismissing him. She was studying him, as if each word was a thread leading towards something she had to unravel. Marcus exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to leave, but he knew leaving now would only stoke her suspicion further. Instead, he met her stare, calm but unyielding. If you want answers, ask yourself why your daughter trusted me. That's more important than where I came from. Her lips parted, then closed again. She didn't like losing ground in a conversation, yet she couldn't ignore the truth of it. Ella had chosen Marcus in her weakest moment. That fact gnawed at Vivian's pride, at the careful image she'd built. Another knock at the door. This time, It was the nurse, pale and flustered. "Ms. Cross, Ella's stable at the hospital. They want you there immediately." Vivian inhaled sharply, her mask of control flickering. She grabbed her bag from the desk, but not before casting Marcus another long, searching look. "This isn't finished?" Marcus's voice was quiet, almost gentle. It's just starting." She left without another word, her heels striking quick, urgent beats down the hall. The door shut with a muffled click, leaving Marcus alone in the cavernous office. He stood still, the mop leaning against his shoulder, the city stretching out before him through the glass. For years he had worked to remain invisible, to keep his world small, contained. But the events of the last few hours had ripped that silence open. His name, his true past, would surface. He knew it. The mop creaked in his grip, a symbol of the life he'd accepted. But in the memory of Ella's fragile hand clutching his sleeve, he felt the stir of something heavier. Responsibility. The kind he'd tried to bury, but could no longer ignore. The office door opened again. Sophie stepped inside quietly, her backpack slung low, her eyes searching his. "I waited downstairs," she said. "I couldn't leave without you." Marcus's chest tightened. "You shouldn't be here." She shook her head stubbornly. "Neither should you." For a moment, father and daughter just stood there, the quiet office holding both of their secrets. Outside, the city glowed with indifference, but inside, Marcus knew the walls were closing in. He put a hand on Sophie's shoulder, steadying her. "Things are changing, we'll face it together." Her eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you, Dad." The words hit harder than any accusation, any judgment he had faced. They gave him strength, even as the storm gathered beyond the office doors. Because Vivian Cross would return. And when she did, she wouldn't be searching for a janitor anymore. She'd be hunting for the truth. The ride home was quieter than Marcus expected. The city lights flickered past the bus window, smearing into streaks of gold against the glass. Sophie sat beside him, her knees drawn up, her face turned toward the window. She hadn't spoken since leaving the tower, but her silence wasn't the silence of anger. It was thought, heavy, complicated thought. Marcus leaned back, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He knew tonight wasn't the end of anything. It was only the opening act. Vivian Cross had seen too much, and Vivian Cross wasn't the kind of woman to let unanswered questions rest. She'd come for him, and she'd come soon. At home, their small apartment smelled faintly of detergent and the stew Sophie had left simmering on the stove. The walls were thin, the furniture worn, but the space carried warmth, a hard-earned comfort built from years of survival. Sophie kicked her shoes off and dropped, her bag onto the couch, finally breaking the silence. "Dad, people are going to find out, aren't they?" Marcus paused in the kitchen doorway, his shoulders tightening. "Probably." Sophie turned, her eyes flashing. "Then let them. You saved a kid's life today. You saved her." The words struck harder than she knew. Marcus poured himself a glass of water, staring at the ripples in the cup. "It's not that simple. People don't see the saving. They see the scandal, the license I lost, the courtroom they dragged me through." Sophie folded her arms. "That was years ago. They were wrong." Marcus lowered the glass, meeting her gaze. "The world doesn't care about wrong. It cares about perception." Sophie shook her head, fire in her voice. "Then change it." Her words lingered, heavy and impossible. Marcus turned away, setting the glass on the counter. He couldn't bear to tell her how many times he had tried, how many doors had been slammed in his face, how every attempt to reclaim his name had only ended in more humiliation. The knock came late, sharp, deliberate. Sophie stiffened, her eyes darting toward the door. Marcus's pulse quickened. Few people ever visited them. Fewer still at this hour. He opened it cautiously. Vivian Cross stood in the hallway, wrapped in a coat that did little to soften her presence. Her hair was immaculate, her makeup untouched despite the day's chaos. Behind her, the dim light of the stairwell painted her figure in stark relief. Marcus didn't move. "You shouldn't be here." Her eyes flicked past him, catching sight of Sophie. Neither should she. Sophie stepped forward before Marcus could stop her. "She has a name, Sophie. Vivian blinked as if unaccustomed to being challenged by someone so young. Then her gaze returned to Marcus. "We need to talk." He didn't answer. Silence was safer, but Sophie's hand brushed his arm, steadying him. "Dad," she whispered, "if you don't, she'll just make it worse." Marcus exhaled slowly and stepped aside. Vivian entered, her eyes scanning the modest apartment, with a faint flicker of disdain quickly masked by curiosity. She stood near the couch, her posture as rigid as if she were still in her boardroom. "I came from the hospital," she said. "Ella's stable. They said if it weren't for you—" She trailed off, her throat working against words she wasn't used to forming. Gratitude didn't come easily to her. Marcus crossed his arms. "You don't owe me thanks." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't patronize me. I owe you the truth. And the truth is, you don't belong where you are. Not with those hands. Not with that voice. You were trained. You were someone." Sophie looked at her father, waiting. Marcus felt the weight of both their gazes, one demanding, the other pleading. He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "I was a doctor," he said at last, the words heavier than he expected. "Pediatric. Trauma. Until a case went wrong, I lost my license, lost everything." Vivian's expression flickered. Triumph at the revelation, but also something else. Pity, maybe. Respect, even if she didn't want to admit it. "And now you mop floors." He met her stare, steady. "Now I take care of my daughter. That's all that matters." Vivian tilted her head, studying him as though he were a puzzle she hadn't yet solved. "Your daughter believes in you. Mine trusts you more than she's ever trusted me. That should bother me, and it does. But it also unsettles me." The admission hung in the air. Sophie's eyes softened, her voice quiet but certain. "Maybe it's because he listens." Vivian glanced at her, then back at Marcus. "You can't hide anymore. The board is restless. The staff whispers. And after tonight, the world will know. You need to decide what you are, janitor or doctor." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And what if I decide I'm just a father?" Vivian stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the apartment's familiar scents. "Then you'll be both dismissed and exposed. Choose carefully, Marcus, because the next time crisis comes, and it will, the world won't let you hide behind a mop." She turned, her heels striking the worn floorboards, and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving silence thick enough to choke on. Sophie whispered into the quiet, "She's right, isn't she?" Marcus sank onto the couch, his head heavy in his hands. "She's dangerous, but she's not wrong." Outside, the city buzzed on, oblivious. Inside, father and daughter sat together in silence, the weight of a decision pressing in. The life he had built, or the life he had buried. The night stretched long after Vivian's departure, but sleep never came. Marcus sat in the dim glow of the living room lamp, Sophie curled against the couch arm, with a blanket drawn around her shoulders. Outside, the city murmured with late-night traffic, indifferent to the storm brewing in their lives. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the mop propped in the corner. The tool had been his shield, his disguise, the marker of the life he had chosen after losing everything. But after today, it felt fragile, like a mask too thin to hold. He heard Sophie stir. Her voice was drowsy, but her words pierced clear. "She won't stop, Dad. She's not the type." Marcus sighed. "I know. She's going to drag it out of you, whether you want it or not." He turned his head, meeting her tired eyes. "And what if what comes out just makes everything worse? What if it just proves them right?" Sophie shook her head, stubborn, even half asleep. "They were wrong. You know it. I know it. And today proved it again. You saved her." Marcus didn't reply. He carried too many ghosts, names and faces he hadn't been able to save. The courtroom had branded him negligent. But what haunted him, and wasn't the verdict, it was the memory of failure, the sound of machines flatlining. By morning, the story had already spread beyond the walls of Vivian's tower. News articles buzzed online. Janitor saves CEO's daughter during medical crisis. Social feeds swirled with shaky phone footage from the lobby, some praising his calm, others demanding answers. Who was he? How did he know what to do? At the apartment door, another knock came, this one earlier than expected. Marcus opened it to find a reporter, mic in hand, camera crew waiting just behind. "Mr. Hale, Marcus Hale, correct? Can we get a statement about yesterday's events?" Marcus's jaw clenched. No comment. He shut the door firmly, his chest tight. Sophie peeked from the hallway, eyes wide. "They're here already?" "They'll be everywhere soon," Marcus said. The day pressed forward, heavy and unrelenting. At work, whispers followed him through every corridor. The same directors who once brushed past without a glance now stepped aside to watch him. The janitor cart squeaked as always, but the weight behind it felt different. He wasn't invisible anymore. When Vivian arrived that afternoon, her entrance was sharp and deliberate. She marched across the lobby with Ella at her side, the child in her wheelchair looking pale but smiling faintly, her patched triceratops still in her lap. The lobby froze. Workers slowed their steps, eyes darting between CEO and janitor, sensing a performance they weren't supposed to miss. Vivian stopped in front of Marcus. Her words were crisp, calculated for every ear present. "Mr. Hale, you will accompany me upstairs. The board requires answers." Marcus looked at Ella first. Her small smile steadied him. Then he turned his gaze back to Vivian. "I told you, I'm a janitor." Her lips curved, not quite into a smile. "Not today, you're not." The elevator ride was crowded. Marcus, Vivian, Ella, and two board directors crammed into mirrored silence. Ella clutched her toy dinosaur, glancing nervously between the adults. Marcus bent slightly, lowering his voice for her alone. "You're okay?" She nodded, whispering, "Because of you." The words nearly undid him. He forced his expression steady, even as the directors exchanged sharp looks behind his back. The conference suite was full when they arrived. Every director present, assistants lining the walls, staff pretending to shuffle papers while their eyes tracked Marcus. He wheeled his cart in, but the absurdity of it struck him. The mop and bucket looked laughably out of place against the polished mahogany. Vivian gestured sharply. "Stand here." Marcus parked the cart against the wall, then moved to the center of the room. The silence stretched as the board members leaned forward, waiting. One of them, an older man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, finally spoke. "Who are you, Mr. Hale? We've all seen the footage. We've heard the accounts. No, janitor does what you did." Marcus felt Sophie's words from the night before echoing in his chest, then let them know. He inhaled slowly. "I was a doctor, pediatric trauma, until they took it away." The room rippled with whispers, sharp as wind against glass. Vivian's eyes flickered, her expression unreadable. Another director asked, "Took it away? Why?" Marcus clenched his jaw, his voice low but steady. "A case went wrong. I was blamed. Negligence, they called it. But negligence doesn't explain why I knew exactly what to do yesterday. Negligence doesn't explain why your CEO's daughter is alive right now." The words landed heavy, shaking the polished calm of the room. Some directors shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward with sharp interest. Ella, oblivious to the politics, clutched her triceratops tighter and whispered into the tense air, "He's my doctor?" The innocence of the statement broke the tension like glass shattering. Whispers turned into silence, every eye drawn to the child. Marcus looked at her, his chest tightening. He hadn't expected her to say it, but she had, and it carried more power than anything he could have claimed himself. Vivian's gaze darted around the room, calculating, reeling. For the first time, it wasn't her voice shaping the narrative. It was her daughter's. The victory strategy was unfolding exactly as Marcus had feared and hoped at once. His silence couldn't hold any longer. The truth was surfacing, and the world was watching. The boardroom had never felt so unsteady. The mahogany table, the abstract art, the polished glass. Every symbol of control seemed hollow under the weight of Ella's small voice. "He's my doctor." No one spoke at first. Even the directors, who had sharpened questions on their tongues, sat back as though the words had stripped them of authority. Vivian Cross stood stiff near the head of the table, her gaze fixed on her daughter. Marcus stayed rooted in place. He hadn't planned for this moment, hadn't wanted it. He'd fought for years to stay invisible, to bury the title that once defined him. Yet here he was, exposed not by arrogance or confession, but by a child's trust. The silver-haired director broke the silence. Doctor or not, you saved her. That much is clear. His voice was careful, wary of stepping into ground too fragile. Another leaned forward, eyes sharp. But the question remains, can we trust a man who hides? The words carried weight, slicing through the room. Marcus steadied himself, refusing to look away. I didn't hide to deceive. I hid because the world decided one mistake erased everything I was. They took my license, my reputation, my future. But what they couldn't take was the part of me that doesn't stop when a child's life is on the line. The air thickened with his words. For the first time, Marcus felt no shame in speaking them. Vivian finally moved, her heels striking the floor as she stepped closer. Her eyes, sharp as glass, locked onto him. And what do you expect me to do with this truth? Parade you as some miracle janitor turned savior? Or bury you before the scandal touches me? Marcus's reply was calm, steady. Neither. You don't have to do anything, because no matter what you choose, everyone here already saw the truth. Your daughter's alive because of me. No spin changes that. The board shifted uneasily. Several eyes flicked toward Vivian, waiting for her to reassert control. But control was slipping, and they all knew it. Ella broke the silence again. Her small voice carried louder than any polished director. Mom, he listens, he sees me. You never play dinosaurs with me. The words pierced Vivian like arrows. Her composure wavered. A faint tremor crossed her lips before she pressed them into a line. For a moment, the CEO mask faltered, and only a mother remained, confronted not by shareholders, but by her child. A director coughed lightly. With respect, Ms. Cross, this company's employees saw what happened. The public saw. The question isn't whether we acknowledge him. It's how we handle the narrative. Vivian's gaze flicked toward Marcus again. She wanted to reduce him back to a mop and uniform, to erase what had just unfolded. But Ella's trust, the director's stares, the whispers from the lobby, all pressed against her. She was boxed in by truth. Marcus let the silence stretch before speaking again. You wanted me invisible, but your daughter made me visible. That's not something you can undo. For the first time, Vivian lowered her eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She simply stood there, silent in front of her empire, and Marcus understood. He had won, not by force or strategy, but by letting his actions speak when hers could not. The meeting adjourned with no resolution, the directors dispersing in murmurs, each carrying away their version of the story. Vivian lingered, staring out the glass wall, as if the city lights could offer clarity. Ella clutched her triceratops, wheeled gently toward Marcus by the nurse. She looked up at him, eyes bright despite the day's toll. You'll still come play dinosaurs, right? Marcus felt the weight in his chest ease. As long as you need me to. Her smile was answer enough. Sophie waited just outside the boardroom doors, her backpack at her feet. When Marcus stepped out, she met him with steady eyes. You didn't hide anymore, she said quietly. He nodded. Number, not anymore. The three of them, Marcus, Sophie, and Ella, stood in the corridor as the tower buzzed around them. Somewhere behind them, Vivian Cross was learning humility in silence. And for once, Marcus felt no need to fight further. The truth had spoken loud enough. He took Sophie's hand, the janitor's mop still leaning against his other shoulder, both lives now woven into one. He had been broken, dismissed, humiliated. But in this building of glass and marble, his dignity had been restored. And though Vivian would never admit it aloud, Marcus knew she understood one thing clearly now. She had chosen the wrong man to underestimate. Now, before we close, what should the next story be titled? Subscribe, and don't miss our next story. Title. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?